Hi, everybody. Welcome to Getting Through It with Lynne White and Friends. Today, my friend is the amazing Richard Fidler. He is the astrologer to the astrologists. He is the best of the best when it comes to astrology. Welcome, first of all, my friend and teacher. It is an honor to have you here. I just have to say.
Well, it's a great pleasure and a great honor to be on your show. And I love this idea, this thing that you're doing. It's really great.
It's so important, isn't it, to help people get through those dark times in their lives, because we're all going through them, whether it's on the personal level, the macro level, with the global unraveling that seems to be happening all around us. No matter where you are, people are, they're going through life-altering changes. And since you are the astrologer of astrologers, I'm wondering if you can tell us what the aspects are that are taking us to this region of our lives right now.
Well, yeah, well, I'll try and give it in a nutshell. But 2020 was obviously a big milestone, I dare say, in modern civilization, you could say, right? And with the astrological factors that affect global developments and processes, very often when you have really big astrological events occurring, by the time their effects are starting to be felt, often the actual astrological factors that set it all in motion have been forgotten. And in 2020, there were some really big astrological events. We had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. That's very key. That's a major astrological consideration in terms of the astrology of global events. And it was a Jupiter
expand, right? And Saturn contracts things. So
right.
You have
yes.
Oppositional poles.
Right, but Jupiter and Saturn, they're like the elders of the planetary family, and Jupiter relates to morality and culture and wisdom and higher learning and all of these sorts of things, whereas Saturn is much more cold and materialistic. But Saturn also, though, is the planet that makes things concrete. And so when Jupiter and Saturn combine, you in a sense have a process of Jupiter sort of transforming or transmuting some of Saturn's energy into a higher form, and Saturn maybe brings Jupiter down to earth a bit, but also enables Jupiter to crystallize somehow. And so, for example, you often have with Jupiter-Saturn combinations a situation where organizations, social movements, institutions that bring ideals into concrete form, they get a fresh impulse. They are new social, socially sort of formative things that emerge at that time, and they form a conjunction every 20 years. And so basically in 2020 we had a new fresh impulse, and a lot of the things that are going on in the world now really in many respects could be traced back there to that time.
Back then was the global pandemic, right? That shifted everything. The way we work, the way we think, the way that we're connected. It changed everything. And it changed our politics. It brought us to where we are now.
Exactly. There are many social issues and social cultural patterns, if you like, or sort of tendencies, if you like, that emerged at that time over and above the pandemic. In fact, in many respects, the pandemic itself was not the most dramatic thing that happened at that time. It was a financially profound time because, the whole world was told to stop working. People were being given money for nothing and told to stay at home. And then a year later, suddenly it was like back to work, and suddenly you had inflation soaring and so there was this whole sort of jarring change of gear all the time. Stop, go, and also it was in 2020 that was when Trump's first term came to an end. And wherever you stand on that spectrum, there was a lot of social discussion and a lot of
chaos,
a lot of stuff going on at that time. And although we might think that it all got left there, actually a lot of that turmoil and a lot of that um, that sort of deep stirring that happened in our society is something we're still digesting. Even for example, it started to become, for perhaps for the first time, much more consequential what you said on social media, where wherever you stood on these different issues, we're still in processing that. But more recently, in 2025 and 2026, we've had a conjunction of Saturn and Neptune. And I believe that that is why, for a good year and a bit now, it's been hard to tell what's going to happen from one to the next.
Yeah, it's gaslighting season, right?
Right. No,
Does anyone tell truth?
No, look, it's I'm sort of being kind of cautious about what I say, because these things are so controversial. However, wherever you stand on these current political issues, it's just been an absolute sort of mess in terms of, there's been no clearly the only distinct characteristic has been chaos, really. We've had the world, with the tariff regime that was brought into play just over a year ago. Whether you think it's a fantastic idea or a terrible idea, well, there's one thing for sure: it upended the
global stability. Yeah,
exactly. And now we've had war this year. I mean, okay, there was even in June last year we had a war with Iran and so on, and so the thing is, it's created a sort of dystopian feeling. I actually, in recent years, I found myself from time to time thinking, how dare you guys even utter words like nuclear war or whatever? This constant this periodic sort of airing of this as a thing, almost as like casually, like,
right.
The world could be annihilated if we're not careful. Don't forget to pay your TV license, and as you work, go back. And like, this is what should we? Why can't we live in a more compassionate world? What? It's almost like a brutal violence to do to people's psyches.
Yes.
I mean, I feel so sorry for like young people having to kind of orientate.
Yes.
In a world that is so constantly under threat,
Yes.
And it's so unnecessary, that we've been given such a beautiful planet. If everybody would just take just a little effort, not even much effort, in fact, just a little care, to create a paradise on this planet.
Absolutely. And I think that if you look back and you look at the astrological aspects, you find that we are under the same aspects as we were in World War II, in the Civil War in the United States, in the Revolutionary War. These are war times, right? And I feel like these are the times that shift men's souls and women, but they are, and they bring us to another place in our life. And we're all trying to get through it, trying to understand it, trying to traverse this new territory, which most of us did not grow up in. We grew up after World War II. Right. Even though there was a Vietnam War, there was a war in Afghanistan, it sort of kind of was foreign to us. Yes, our people went and fought in those wars, but it didn't feel like we were so ensconced in them. But although we were, all of us. Yes. But this feels different. This feels like an upset of ideology, which shifts so many things in everybody's life. And this Iran war, the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, it's changed the way that we buy our gas globally. People might have to ration gas in places like Australia, which is something that we've not lived through before. And I know that we will get through it. This show is all telling people how to get through these things. But I think that what you do, Richard, that I find so rewarding and so helpful is that you lead by example. Richard teaches a lot of classes in astrology. You're the big guru in Vedic astrology, and you blend Vedic and Western astrology perfectly together and show how they work together, and help people see the blueprints in their own lives, right? And help us see what's going on structurally in the world. So we know that, yes, we're going through this dark tunnel in this time in our lives, but I know that there is that light on the other side of this where we do find that we do come together again. The globe does kind of coalesce around peace, right? And helping each other as opposed to being so tribal and hurting each other. And I just, having taken so many of your courses, I know that there's a big shift coming in 2030. Whether it's for the best or not, I know that China emerges as something stronger from what we've been told. And that we all kind of have to find our footing again because, there is, as Kamala Harris said, there's no going back. We can't come back from this, We've reprocessed the way the world works.
Right. It makes me think that about, in 2020, there was a moment there where I had such a distinct sense of the world was never going to be the same again. That there's a certain type of world that I think we both are familiar with, or people who are grown adults now would have lived in a time where life was kind of simpler, and so on. And I do believe that the world can become good again, if I could put it that way, but it's never going to be the same again. There's certain things I feel that have changed irrevocably. So I really do resonate with this idea that, there's no old paradise to go back to. Too many things have changed, for us to go there. But what we do have to do is find a way to accept where we find ourselves, deal with all of the realities, and many of them are not so ideal, and do our best, which is really all we can do, to make the future better. And as you were speaking, it got me thinking a lot about the sort of interface or the interplay between individual and collective processes. They're so intertwined. A lot of what we're talking about here on the global scale, in other words, like trying to find our way through this dystopian mess, is essentially exactly the same thing as individuals often have to deal with when their personal worlds go through a period of chaos and confusion and disorientation, and where they have to dig deep somehow to find the courage to carry on and to, I want to say, sort of like find that North Star, find something to aim towards, to maintain, to give a sense of direction, to move towards, and so on. And so, the one of the real difficulties in this time is, and I mean, look, I sort of hesitate as I say this because I don't want to pretend that I've got this down every day, and that I don't, this is, there's certain things that we all have to cultivate. It means we have to work at it and nurture it all the time. And that is, we have to find a way to be aware of what's going on, be aware of the world's challenges, but at the same time, recognize how important it is not to allow ourselves to lose hope, to become angry, to become embittered, to become despondent, to become fearful. Because when we as individuals succumb in this way to what's going on, it makes it so much harder for the world, to be saved, for a better words, and I think it's easy for us to sometimes forget that we might be just little individuals, but we are all contributing in a very meaningful way to what, where everything is going. In other words, whether we like it or not, and whether we realize it or not, we are not spectators. We are the actors and we are the makers, the creators of everything. And I think it's easy to forget that, because we see all these, big people and, the politicians seeming to be the only ones with agency, the only ones who are making stuff happen. And that I think we, the little people, often feel that, that we're being trodden underfoot, so to speak, and we can just, all we can do is just try and get through another day. But I don't think, we often realize how much power there is simply in us as individuals living our lives as consciously as possible. And of course, this is a little bit cliched on the surface, but why this is more difficult than ever, I think, is because we live in this age of being bombarded with information all the time.
Yes.
Even if you're not trying to be exposed to the news and so on, and unless you're literally living in the jungle somehow, you are constantly being bombarded with mostly disheartening information. And so it takes profound psychological resilience and some deep source in oneself of purpose, to not to be overwhelmed by all of this. And I think that is, even when we don't have a personal crisis, as we sometimes do, right? Even without a personal crisis, it's hard enough.
Yes.
But one little extra piece I want to add is this sort of almost leads me back to the whole topic of personal crisis, because sometimes these personal crises that we as individuals go through, when we're going through them, we mostly just thinking, how am I going to survive this? But actually, sometimes when we look back, we see that it was precisely because of those crises that we found our niche in the world, where we found or awakened in ourselves that which we can contribute.
That's right.
Like the crisis is often the catalyst for people finding their not only their personal purpose, but in Africa there's a saying, there's the word Ubuntu, which means a person is a person because of other people. There's no such thing as personal purpose that isn't social.
That's right. We're interconnected. We're a tribe of man and women.
Exactly.
And I know what's fascinating about you is that you are of many cultures, right? You were born in South Africa. Yeah. You started studying astrology in your teens, right? And then you studied Vedic astrology. You lived in India for a while. You're currently in London. You've seen many, many different species of man. And you've helped people in all these countries and cultures get through their tough times, because that's kind of what astrology does in its sense of purpose. It gives you a roadmap of your life. And in everybody's life, there is a difference in what path you take. But we're all here to learn something. And you learn, like you said, mostly through strife. That's where the biggest lessons are learned. And I know that you've worked with people downtrodden. You've worked with kings. You've explained to people, okay, so I see, yes, you may have an illness coming up, but in 5 years from now, I see you blossoming. Your gift, your tool allows people to see that in their own lives. And that, I think, is an amazing accomplishment, and that you reach so many people and you've helped so many people, makes you just one of the most gifted healers I've ever encountered on my little journey here in this world. And I know you have stories of your own feeling of, maybe I didn't do that the right way, or ouch, that hurt. And you tell them. What I love about the way you teach is you tell your personal stories, and it helps your students understand better, the way we maneuver our own trajectory along the road of astrology, as you're teaching us that. But I love the fact that you had, I don't even know, there's so many Richard stories now that I've heard that I just love. And I want you to tell us what you think your hardest time was and how you got through it.
Yeah. Well, there's sort of two periods that sort of come to mind for me in that regard. And, one of these that comes to mind was probably around 2006 or 7. And, I was really struggling. I was really, really very, very poor. And I lived in I rented a little room that was attached to a garage, which the garage didn't have a door. Neither did my room have a door. And so that basically there was a cold draft that just poured straight into my place. And there was literally a tree growing through the wall, like not subtly, half the wall was a tree. I kid you not, it was something you could make a movie from. There were little scorpions. Tiny little scorpions were scurrying, or the floor was just broken concrete, and they were just like forever like little scorpions scurrying, And I remember my mother having some years prior to that told me she hates God. She was obviously just being melodramatic in some moment, but she was like, and I remember saying to her, a little bit condescendingly, "Come on, what I mean, you can't hate God. God's the boss. You got no business having an opinion about what God." Brings into your life. And I remember at that time thinking, I think I'm getting it now, Mom. I think I'm getting it. I think I get where you're coming from with this. Like, why? How? And I remember at the time, I was a vegetarian. I didn't even utter a foul word. I felt like, why is it that I try to live purely and correctly and so on, and I'm in this mess? How can it be fair? Why? And why the reason I'm telling you the story is because, there came a point where I actually realized I've got to get rid of this self-pity. I've got to get rid of this anger. I've got to get rid of this resistance and the struggle against, the way things are. Yes, it's terrible. But I give up. I give up questioning why it is this way. And there was a moment where I essentially basically said, more or less to the cosmic mother, whatever you think is good for me, I give up second guessing if it's right or not. I surrender. And I didn't even think. It was a profound cathartic moment of expressing that energetically, you could say. I think I literally put my head on the ground and just said, that's it. And the profound thing is I didn't think about it after that, but I think that it immediately resulted in an unburdening, and I was no longer, there's a line from A Course in Miracles that goes, infinite patience brings immediate results.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I think at that moment I entered a space of infinite patience. There was no more, things didn't have to change. It was fine as it was. And it took me some years before I looked back and realized, wow, actually, weeks later, I had a car. And then suddenly everything changed in my life. Within weeks, my life was transformed. But I didn't notice it for years. I didn't realize it was so, I had so surrendered. And for me, that time was very important because it was something that could, an experience that I think helps me to have some empathy for people who are going through times when life's really, really unfair. And, of course, it doesn't, me just saying, oh, just surrender. Don't worry, just put your head on the ground, say to Cosmic Mother, of course, you've got to arrive there. You've got to arrive there. Okay, but yes,
yeah,
it has to reach a certain critical mass in your own life. But generally speaking, I think whether it's astrology or any other similar tool, the astrology by itself is all good and well, but if you don't marry it with some sort of personal journey where you're also extracting the lessons from your own life struggles, then actually you're not going to have much for people. And perhaps on a slightly less sort of existential note, there was this one time where I had all these clients coming to me who were having these Saturn-Venus transits. And I knew exactly what that meant. I looked at the chart and I was like, let me guess. Your lover has left you. You feel terrible, don't you? You feel like you could just about die of sorrow, and so on and so on. And I could speak at length about just how it was and how it all, in detail describe the pain of the separation and all of that. But after a number of such encounters, there seemed to be a whole bunch of them that happened in over a few months. I thought, I've got this uncomfortable feeling that I don't really have much for these people. I'm like a doctor who can tell you that you're sick, and then that's it. That's the end of the consultation. Off you go, and you're not really any other wiser or any better off. And then I remember that a year or so passed, and it was time for me to have a Saturn-Venus transit. And, I met somebody, and this nice relationship started developing. And then one day, this person just ghosted me out of the blue. And I was like a little baby whose mama had told him that he wasn't loved anymore. And I was absolutely freaking out. And, not outwardly, but inwardly, I was wailing.
Yeah. Been there. We've all been there. Yeah.
We've all been there, and this is why I say this is something, of course, it's part of one of life's necessary amounts.
The lesson of love.
Exactly. And it often happens more than once in one's life.
Yes.
But the thing is, you see, when a person's going through it, it can be really, really, really difficult at the time. Absolutely. Even though, of course, people who've been through it look at you sort of like, and tell you, they're there. But anyway, the thing is, I remember at that time sort of putting out a prayer saying, I know there must be medicine for this. And I know that it's going to be a bitter pill. Yeah. But I want that medicine. And by bitter pill, I meant I know that the medicine is going to require of me to release some cherished illusion. There's something that I don't want to let go of, some attitude, some perception, some assumption about the way life is, how relationships are, that I am needing to embrace, but which I'm resisting. And I know as long as I keep resisting that, this pain is going to persist. And I remember I was visiting my brother at the time, and, I just went to his bookshelf, and this, he's not a particularly philosophical person. He just happened to have this one book, which was the Experiential Guide to the Celestine Prophecy, which I opened at the point that spoke about the 4 control dramas. The poor me, the aloof, the interrogated, and the intimidated. But what's more important is that it explained how we none of us got all the reinforcement we needed from our parents in our early life, and we don't realize it. But when we grow up and start having more complicated human relationships, particularly romantic type relationships, we start transferring onto these other people a lot of the expectation that they provide, that they, or the hope that they will provide for us, some of that nourishment, some of that security, some of that reassurance that we didn't get. And of course, sometimes they do provide it for us, and when they do, we're all very happy. But the moment they step out of line, in so to speak, the moment they're not responding and showing up exactly as we like, we fall apart. And there was there was a profound realization for me there about the fact that we have, in a sense, forgotten that we have access to our own source of power, our own source of nourishment. And if we don't make that connection, if we don't focus on connecting with our own core, our own soul, whatever language you're going to put around this, we're always going to carry on having these frustrating situations in relationships. And we're always going to be acting up, thinking that we are the victims when in fact we are the perpetrators, because we are being demanding, how can I'm giving you all of myself, how can you not surrender all of yourself, and so on. So I may not be wording this quite right, but that time was very important because it made me understand patterns in my life in terms of relationships, at a much deeper level. But it also, here's where the astrology comes in. The astrology provided that map of the territory and said, you are now here, right. And this same place, the same place I was located at energetically was a place I had, heard of and was, telling other people about when they were there, but minus the medicine.
Yes.
Yes. And so, astrology by itself can often help you understand the territory, but it doesn't by itself always provide the medicine. The medicine comes from our, as a practitioner, your own struggles with these things. And now, but the value of the astrology is that it kind of helps you to engage with these struggles maybe a little less blindly. And then, I wouldn't say that it means that now any person who's having a Saturn-Venus transit, I'm able to wave a magic wand, utter some magic words, and suddenly they are freed of their misery. But I believe that having found some genuine medicine, and I can still go through the same sadness myself, right? But I'm not quite as lost in the wilderness.
Right. It's interesting because you understand the astrology of it, and you can feel the feelings, know that, okay, I'm going through this transit right now, but you also know that there's another transit coming in another 6 months, maybe another year, even if it's a Saturn 2.5 years. There is something on the other side of it, right? And this is all about learning, all about figuring out what you just talked about, that it really, all of this comes from within. It's the internal, not always the external. And that is confirmation right there. That we all go through these things, and we all get through these things, and we're all the better for them on the other side of the sadness, the darkness, the hurt, the drama, the trauma. We all do manage to survive those things. And we end up in the kind of relationships, the kind of experiences that are more fulfilling, because you probably attract that person who's then where you are as a more evolved soul. And I just hear it in your voice. I love, the way that you tell the story of your life makes me wonder what drew you to astrology all the way back when you were in your teens, in Pretoria.
Right. Well, I mean, the way it came into my life was on the surface seemingly sort of accidental. I think I was 15, 16 years old, and I was in an all boys high school, and a friend of mine said, "Hey, we're going to go meet some girls from the art school," and met these arty people, and one of them said, "What's your sign?" And I said, "Chile, you don't believe in that stuff. How can there be 12 kinds of people?" And then this person said, "Well, a proper astrological birth chart involves looking at where all the planets are at the moment that you were born." And I knew just enough about the solar system to realize, wow, like if that is actually the case, then that is quite something. That actually means that the pattern of the solar system at the moment that you were born is like a type of fingerprint, really, and so that led to this exploration. And actually, just today I was actually talking with a group of astrologers, and one of them was people were saying to one of the people in the group, why don't you start doing consultations? And this person was saying, oh yeah, I don't know, and it made me reflect a little on why do I do it? And to be honest, I actually realized that one of the reasons I did it is because I didn't think, why not? Right. And I actually see that sometimes, I remember once a friend, one of my friends and clients introduced me to her work colleagues and said, well, this is my astrologer. And one of them said, well, gee, astrologer, those are very big shoes to fill. And I remember saying, well, look, if I ever thought of it that way, I would never have started. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is it wasn't exactly some sort of mission, right? It developed organically. And literally, I was working as a waiter when I was about 19 or 20, and one of my fellow waiters said, you keep telling us these interesting things about our planets. Won't you create a little report for me? And then I said, well, look, I can't do that. I'm not an astrologer. And then he insisted. And this was like probably around 1990. It's not like you could just Google it or just go and get your chart done. If you met somebody who could do it, that was like you seized the opportunity. And so this just very organically led to a process of getting in more involved in it. Now, the way I'm describing it there could almost sound like I'm sort of underplaying the significance of it, almost like as if it was just an accident. I don't know if it was some past life thing, or I don't know if it was an accident. I'll leave that to maybe God knows the answer to that one. But what I can say is that as I did more and more consultations, and as I got a little bit older, and I started to realize this is actually a very blessed thing to do, and that there's a lot of responsibility in it. Obviously when I was younger, I was sometimes a little bit like less mindful of these things, and I realized, no, this is you've got to be more mindful and respectful of this whole process and so on. And so I just, all I can say is I'm very grateful for it. I'm very grateful it came into my life. I don't know what the reason is, and I think it was partly simply just because I didn't question it. There was just some point where I found myself saying, looks like I'm an astrologer, because that's like
yeah, and you're being modest, not just an astrologer. You're an astrologer of Western astrology and Vedic astrology, which is, to most souls very complicated unless you grew up in India and understand it, from a child. It's not an easy thing to learn. It's very intricate. It's very detailed. There's another language involved that seems to come very naturally to you, which doesn't to everybody. And the fact that you have so much knowledge of this, that you're able to spit it back out and teach it globally to people all over the world. You teach two astrologers. That's a pretty big, crown to wear. And you do it well, and you help people along the way. That's what, to me, is just, I feel like I'm in the presence of genius whenever I get to have a conversation with you or just listen to you in a class. And I encourage anybody out there, go onto Richard's website. We'll tell you about that in a minute, and sign up for one of his courses, because you will learn more than you ever anticipated. You have a way of teaching things that no other teacher can do, in the way that your life experience has taught you to spit out the information, that I find just compelling. And before we go, I know time is running out. I've always wondered this. You had your time in India, and because you were so good, you got to read for kings. Now,
Not quite kings, no, but yes, the
yes,
dignified people. Yes,
Raj,
yes,
whatever, yes.
yeah.
And what is that like? Did you feel intimidated? Did you have information that you had to give them that maybe, oh, you thought maybe it's not going to take this so well? How did you do it? That to me would be like
Yeah.
fascinating to be a fly on that wall to watch you do it.
You know, I think I've had the, I suppose, good fortune of um, rendering astrological services to people of all kinds. From in South Africa at one stage, when uh, I literally just laid out a little mat in the street, and mostly it was the guys washing the cars on the side of the road who gave me like a few pennies as a donation, and they thought that most of them were indigenous black people, saw me as probably some shaman. They didn't understand how and why, they just did it anyway. To people who have, CEOs of multinational corporations and things like that, people who are, if not kings literally, but the equivalent of that. But to be honest, Lynn, you know, this is also something that came to mind for me recently. Like we keep, I think we are, us little people often think that these bigger people who are doing everything were sort of like spawned in some other galaxy, like some special beings that were brought down here to rule over us, but they're actually just like us, and half the time they're not. Sometimes they're actually kind of quite mediocre, actually. And so I suppose the point I want to make is that I found that people are all the same. And so while, of course, from time to time, having done consultations for powerful people, while yes, there's a sense of it being an honor, I never felt too intimidated by them, and it's not because I'm such a tough guy or proud person or something, just because they're just people. And in fact, I think that they generally appreciate
Yeah.
being treated that way,
And they come back,
respectfully, but not, yeah, not with awe.
right. And they come back for more because you're so good.
Right.
And I know you went to school with Elon Musk.
I
What was
did. I did. I did. Well, we were in the same high school, and I think he was a year older than I am. But I do sort of remember passing him in the corridor. So we weren't buddies, but we were in the same high school at the same time.
And he was a nerd then, just always studying and reading and
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know him personally, so it wasn't it wasn't that I got to know him as an individual
right.
as such, but we were in the same high school, and it was quite a good high school. It was it was a public school, but it was kind of like I think it had been established when the British still ruled in South Africa. So it had, the teachers literally still wore those, like in Harry Potter, those robes and,
Right.
and all of that. So it was a very sort of good school. But yeah, that beyond that, passing him in the corridors, I haven't got much to add.
Now, I know you have a book coming out. Can you tell us a little bit
Yes.
about?
Well, yes. Actually, there's a few, but one is very, very close, and it's on transits, and which is the technique where you calculate how the current planets interact with your personal birth chart, and so it's essentially a sort of textbook for interpreting life cycles. And as you would know, Lynn, transits is really like a very, very key step in the journey of learning astrology. There's before there's your journey before transits and your journey after transits, because
Right.
that's where it goes from generalized statements about your personality to very specific energetic events and processes that you deal with in time. And these cycles range from things that happen or unfold in a few hours to things that unfold over several years. So just this one technique covers a very wide array of different things we experience as individuals. So I'm very excited about this. I mean, after all these years, I mean, I've written tons and tons and tons of stuff over the years, but I've just never actually published it. And now, in the next few weeks,
That's awesome. And tell us where we can find you and find out more about the book, your classes, where you might be speaking.
Right. Well, my website, richardfidler.com, is where probably the best place to find me. You could probably also find me. Richard Alwyn Fidler is my full name. You could find me on Facebook there, and but I think my website's a good place to go. And pretty soon, I don't think anything is on there yet about my coming book. We're busy tweaking the cover and so on, but very soon, within the coming weeks, that'll be coming out, and there'll be some news about it on my website and so on.
All so exciting. I thank you so much, my teacher, my friend, for being here. You are a gift.
It's a great pleasure and a great honor, and thank you so much. And really well done on doing this, because I'm sure that this is going to be so inspiring for so many people. So this is a wonderful thing you're doing.
Oh, thank you. That's the hope. And you bring us hope and encouragement. You inspire, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynne.